September 8, 1944, Lorraine, France. The morning fog rolled thick as milk over the muddy fields, swallowing every shape until friend and foe were ghosts in the gray. Inside a Sherman tank that stank of oil, sweat, and cordite, a tall, sunburned man from Texas sat with his hands on the controls. His crew called him Boss, but the Germans had another name for him, Der Farmer. They said it with laughter over the radio, mocking his accent, mocking his tank, mocking everything they thought made Americans soft. They didn't know yet that this farmer was about to carve his name into armored warfare history. One smoldering German tank at a time. The engine rattled like a caged animal. Mud slapped against the hull as the Sherman inched forward, its treads groaning under the weight. Private Murray, the gunner, cracked his knuckles and muttered, "Feels like they're watching us again." Sergeant Lopez, the loader, wiped grease on his sleeve. "They're always watching, partner. Question is, who shoots first?" The man in the commander's seat, the so-called Texas farmer, didn't answer. His blue eyes were fixed on the tree line, where faint silhouettes shimmered between the fog and morning light. The radio hissed. A German voice, confident and cruel, came through. "Achtung, Sherman Coup! The milk cows are coming again." Laughter followed. German laughter. It wasn't the first time they'd called them that. Milk cows. Slow, soft, and easy to kill. The words burned deeper than any shell wound. The commander had grown up with men who laughed the same way when he told them he wanted to leave Texas to fight. They said, "What's a farmer gonna do in Europe? Fix tractors for Patton." Now, sitting in the belly of a rumbling machine half buried in mud, he could almost hear their voices blending with the Germans. The insult was the same. The irony was about to be greater than anyone could imagine. He glanced at the small photo taped above the radio, a faded picture of his wife and newborn son. The edges were curling from months of sweat and vibration. "We'll be home soon," he whispered, though no one could hear over the roar of the engine. A distant crack split the morning, the shriek of an incoming shell. The Sherman lurched as earth exploded around them. Murray ducked instinctively. "Panzer!" he shouted. The commander's calm was terrifying. "Hold fire." He scanned the tree line through his binoculars, smoke curling across the fields like breath from a giant. He saw the glint. Not one, not two, but 4 panthers waiting like wolves at the edge of the forest. Their barrels shifted toward him, steel predators in perfect coordination. The Germans laughed because they thought the Shermans were stupid, too light, too slow, too soft. They had no idea how clever the man from Texas had become. He'd spent his boyhood learning to read the land, where water would pool after rain, where soil gave under weight, how the sun shifted shadows across a field. Now those same instincts worked through him like second sight. "Angle us 5 degrees left," he said. "We'll let the hill eat their first shot." Lopez nodded, muscles tight, eyes wide. The tank crawled sideways, armor screeching. The first German shell hit the slope in front of them, throwing dirt and fire into the air. The second shell punched just above their turret, carving a glowing scar into the steel. "Now!" he barked. Murray's gun boomed, the recoil slamming him back. The round screamed across the field and caught the lead panther just under the turret ring. A fountain of flame erupted. The laughter on the radio stopped. For the first time, the Germans sounded uncertain. The commander smiled, a slow, dangerous grin. "They thought we were farmers," he muttered. "Let's harvest." The Sherman advanced, firing twice more. The second panther went up like a bonfire, its ammunition cooking off in bursts of orange and white. The third backed away in panic, reversing into a ditch. Murray's shot hit the exposed rear plate. Another explosion. The fourth turned and fled, treads churning through mud. Silence followed, broken only by the creak of metal cooling in the wind. Inside the tank, no one cheered. They just sat there, breathing hard, ears ringing, hearts thudding. The commander lit a cigarette with trembling fingers. Smoke curled in front of his face. "That's 3 today," he said quietly. "Make it 4 if that last one doesn't come back." Outside, the smell of burning fuel mixed with the sweet rot of wet earth. Flames danced against the fog, painting the sky with hellish light. It was both victory and omen. The Germans had laughed. Now they'd remember his name. As the day wore on, reports trickled through the radio network. A Sherman crew leading multiple assaults, moving faster than headquarters could track. Soldiers in other units began to whisper about the man from Texas who seemed to appear everywhere. Striking, vanishing, striking again. The nickname spread faster than official reports. That farmer, they said. The farmer who hunts tanks. But behind every triumph was the shadow of exhaustion. 81 days of nonstop combat would break most men. Even now, under his calm, the commander felt the weight. His hands were cracked from oil and frost, his back raw from the seat, his eyes bloodshot from nights without sleep. He'd stopped writing letters home. Words couldn't explain what he saw. Friends turned to smoke, shells cutting through air like screams. That evening, as they camped beside the road, Lopez leaned against the turret, chewing cold rations. "You think they'll ever stop calling us farmers?" he asked. The commander exhaled a long stream of cigarette smoke. "Maybe," he said, "but I don't mind it anymore." He looked out at the fields stretching to the horizon. Once, those fields would have been filled with cotton or corn. Now they were littered with steel carcasses and shattered glass. Somewhere in that mess, he saw the reflection of home. The wide skies, the sweat on his father's brow, the smell of earth after rain. It was all the same soil, just a different harvest. He remembered the first time he saw a Sherman, thought it looked like a steel version of his old tractor. Simple, rough, but reliable. It wasn't glamorous like the German machines, but it worked. It endured. That was enough. Maybe that was what the Germans never understood. The farmer didn't fight with pride, he fought with purpose. As night fell, the crew climbed onto the tank's hull, sharing quiet jokes to keep the ghosts away. The sky glowed faintly orange from burning wrecks across the valley. Murray said softly, "You ever think about what they say about us?" The commander shrugged. "They can laugh, but tomorrow they'll be running." He stretched out under the stars, the metal beneath him still warm from battle. The frogs croaked from a ditch somewhere, just like they did back home. He closed his eyes for a moment, the roar of distant artillery fading into something almost peaceful. In the coming weeks, the world would learn his name, Lafayette G. the Texas farmer, the man whose Sherman crew destroyed 258 German tanks, armored cars, and vehicles in just 81 days. But tonight, he was just a soldier lying in a muddy field, listening to the wind slide over burned metal. He didn't know he was making history. He only knew that when the laughter stopped, the silence would speak louder than any radio. They called him a farmer. He became their nightmare. They mocked his tank. He made it legendary. And as the fog closed in again, one line echoed in his head like a promise to the dead: "Tomorrow, we harvest." The rain came harder in October. By then, the fields of Lorraine were nothing but endless scars of churned mud, burnt tanks, and half-buried helmets. The war had swallowed the summer and left only smoke and steel behind. Inside their Sherman, which they now called In the Mood, the Texas farmer and his crew had already lost count of the number of times death had reached for them. They were alive, somehow, but their luck was a candle burning low. The first weeks after Ericourt had been brutal. The Germans had returned with new Panthers, fresh crews, and heavier guns. Every engagement felt like suicide wrapped in orders. The Sherman's armor, never thick enough, screamed under impact after impact. Yet the farmer refused to retreat. "We fight with what we've got," he'd say, and the crew obeyed, because somehow every time they followed him, they lived. He studied the ground like a hunter. To others, it looked like random mud and hedges. To him, it was geometry, the angles, the folds, the places where sun glare or fog could blind a panther for 3 seconds. That was enough. The German tanks were faster, deadlier, and meaner, but they needed open ground. So he never gave it to them. His commander back at HQ once mocked him. "Poole, you're turning this war into a damn rodeo." Poole had smiled, leaning against his Sherman's hull. "Sir, that's the point. The bulls keep dying. But every miracle came at a price. They'd lost their sister tank, In the Mood too, to a direct hit that tore through its turret. The explosion was so violent that fragments of it rained on their own Sherman. Lopez had climbed out afterward, shaking, his uniform smeared with someone else's blood. "We're not supposed to live this long," he'd muttered. Poole didn't argue. He just climbed back into the commander's hatch and looked at the smoking field, jaw tight, eyes cold. That night, he opened a tin of beans and stared at the little flame of their stove. Murray asked if he was all right. "Yeah," Poole said. "I just keep wondering if it's me or the tank doing the fighting." Days blurred together. Sometimes they fought 3 times before noon. Sometimes they went days without firing a shot, only to wake to artillery raining from nowhere. The tank smelled permanently of cordite and sweat, the floor slick with grease and ash. The gun barrel was so worn it screamed like a banshee with every round. Yet amid the chaos, a strange kind of genius began to take shape. Poole started experimenting small things first. He realized the German optics relied heavily on long-range advantage. So he started closing distance fast, using smoke shells and terrain to blind them, then striking from the side or rear. He used radios like a conductor uses instruments, synchronizing 3 or 4 tanks like a pack of wolves. His movements became rhythm. His orders, instinct. Left ridge, 20 yards. Fire 1, wait 2 seconds. Move back. Now again. Each command was short, calm, surgical. He began to read battlefields like weather. The sound of artillery told him distance. The silence told him when they were flanking. Even the smell of burning oil told him which model they'd hit. "That's no Panzer IV, he'd say. "That's a Panther. Different smoke." He could identify German tanks by the color of their flames. His men started believing he could see through fog. They joked he had tractor eyes, could sense a rut before the track found it. Murray said, "Ain't no man that lucky." Poole just replied, "Luck's what happens when you do the same thing 1,000 times and live." But the strain was showing. Sleep came in fragments, dreams in static. When he did sleep, he saw the same things: burning hulks, the faces of Germans screaming inside their tanks, and the flash of their own shells. He'd wake up sweating, hearing the clang of the breech even when it wasn't firing. Then came the ambush at Nancy. They were ordered to hold a crossroads. The Germans sent a spearhead, 6 tanks, and 12 half-tracks. The farmer's Sherman sat camouflaged behind haystacks, the air thick with the smell of damp straw. He waited until the enemy rolled right past them. Lopez's hands shook on the shells. "You sure?" Poole said nothing. He counted in his head. "Now." They hit the lead vehicle, then the tail, boxing the rest in. The field turned into an inferno. Every second felt like eternity. Metal screaming, rounds bouncing, voices shouting in German and English, and smoke choking both. They wiped the whole column in minutes, but the shock hit them afterward like an earthquake. Murray sat down on the tank's floor, trembling. "That ain't war," he whispered. "That's slaughter." Poole looked at the wrecks and said softly, "It's both." That night, the rain returned, washing the blood into the mud. Poole finally wrote a letter home. He didn't mention the kills or the medals. He wrote, "Sometimes, I forget what peace looks like." Then he folded the page and stared at it for a long time before tucking it into his pocket. The radio crackled again the next morning. Reports from higher command. German armor was beginning to avoid their sector entirely. They'd rather detour miles than face the Texas farmer. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same Germans who once mocked the cowboys in tin cans were now whispering about him like he was a ghost. But the farmer wasn't invincible. One shell could end it all. He knew it. So did his men. Every time the turret rotated, every time they fired, they felt the weight of luck pressing down. The loader's hands blistered, the gunner's eyes bloodshot from smoke. The roar of the engine vibrated through their bones. Then came the day the farmer's tank was hit. Not destroyed, not yet. A shell tore into the right track, throwing the Sherman sideways. They bailed out under fire, bullets snapping past like hornets. Poole grabbed Lopez by the collar, dragging him to a ditch. "We're not done," he shouted. And somehow he meant it. They fixed the track under fire, mud turning to blood, fingers numb and trembling. When the engine coughed back to life, the entire crew laughed hysterically. Half madness, half miracle. They survived. Again. Word spread like wildfire. A tank crew that refused to die. A commander who fought like a farmer protecting his land. The myth grew faster than the man. Even the Germans started to believe he had a sixth sense, that he could smell their ambushes, hear their tanks breathing through the fog. But inside, Poole wasn't smiling. He could feel something closing in, not the enemy, but exhaustion itself. His men followed him into every fight, trusting him completely. That was the heaviest burden of all. One evening, as they refueled near a burned-out village, a young replacement from another unit walked up and said, "Sir, how do you do it? How do you keep winning?" Poole looked at him for a long time, his face lined with grime and fatigue. "You don't win," he said quietly. "You just keep fighting until the war forgets to kill you." That night, thunder rolled across the horizon. The farmer sat alone atop his tank, smoking in silence, eyes fixed on the black sky. Lightning flickered, and for a moment he saw the reflection of fire in the clouds, like the future warning him what was coming. He didn't believe in destiny, but he did believe in rhythm, the rhythm of battle, the pattern of survival. And that rhythm was about to break. The Germans weren't laughing anymore. They were hunting the hunter. Somewhere out there, an anti-tank crew was setting a trap, one that would finally test whether the legend was man or myth. The fog was gone now. What replaced it was fire, pure, relentless, living fire. By November 1944, the German army no longer mocked the Texas farmer. They feared him. His name traveled across enemy radio bands like a curse. Achtung, Poole ist here. The man from Texas had become something between a legend and a ghost. The 3rd Armored Division followed his lead across France and into Germany, cutting through armored formations once thought invincible. His crew had turned their Sherman tank into a predator, a machine that hunted machines. At dawn, the horizon glowed orange with the fires of Metz. The smell of wet ash and diesel hung thick in the air. Inside in the mood, Poole and his men were running on instinct. Sleep was a rumor. The gun barrel rattled with every movement. They had fought 53 days straight, destroyed more than 200 enemy vehicles, and somehow the tank still breathed, like a weary bull refusing to die. "Looks like they're pulling back again," Lopez muttered, pressing a shell into the breech. His hands were raw from weeks of reloading. Murray adjusted the sight and spat out the window slit. "They're not pulling back. They're waiting." Poole squinted through his binoculars. Across the plain, the silhouette of a Panther tank shimmered in the morning heat. Behind it, 2 more waited, patient, confident. It was always the same game. The Germans would bait the Americans, force them into the open, and tear them apart with long-range guns. But Poole didn't take the bait. He turned to his driver, Delaney. "We'll circle south. Use the ridge. That's swamp ground," Delaney warned. "Yeah," Poole said, "but they don't know how to swim." The Sherman lurched forward, mud splattering up the sides. The treads groaned under the strain. Every bump rattled their bones, every jolt a reminder that one mistake meant death. But the farmer's sense for terrain was almost supernatural. He used the curve of the land to disappear from sight, emerging behind the German line just as they began to reposition. "Target rear hull, middle one first," Poole said calmly. Murray fired. The shell slammed into the Panther's engine compartment. A bloom of fire erupted, black smoke rising like a pillar. The Germans panicked, their formation collapsing. Before they could react, Poole's second shot ripped through another tank's flank. The radio crackled with shouting voices, both English and German. Chaos, and through it, Poole's steady drawl. "Shift right 20 yards. Don't waste the smoke. We'll use theirs." Every move was poetry written in diesel and steel. The farmer didn't just fight, he orchestrated. Tanks under his direction moved like parts of a living organism, striking and retreating in perfect rhythm. His tactics were being recorded, analyzed, copied. U.S. commanders studying after-action reports began calling his maneuvers Poole's pattern, a combination of terrain exploitation, radio coordination, and relentless aggression. By the time the smoke cleared, 5 Panthers and 6 half-tracks were burning. The sky was filled with greasy columns of fire twisting into the clouds. Murray grinned. "That's number 253, he said. Lopez leaned back, exhausted, muttering a prayer in Spanish. But there was no time to celebrate. A new German column was moving from the east, 30 vehicles strong. The largest engagement yet. Poole didn't flinch. He looked at his men and said, "Then we'll make it even." The battle stretched across miles. Shermans raced through the mud, their guns barking in staccato rhythm. The air trembled with explosions. Poole's voice never wavered, even as shells screamed past. 3 o'clock, range 600. Fire. Move. Reload. Fire again. Observers from other units would later write that his tank moved like it had eyes. The Germans described him differently. "A mad American who fights like he's on fire." Hours passed. The battlefield became a sea of flame and shattered armor. When the last German column broke, only silence remained. Heavy, unnatural. The farmer's Sherman sat still, its barrel smoking, its paint scorched from heat. They had destroyed 15 tanks in one day. Back at headquarters, reports came in so fast that clerks stopped verifying them. The official count, 258 armored vehicles and artillery pieces destroyed in 81 days, seemed impossible. "One crew can't do that," a major muttered. Another officer replied, "Then tell that to the wrecks on the road to Cologne." Even German propaganda couldn't ignore him. They issued orders to identify and destroy the American ace in the Sherman. Flyers circulated among panzer divisions warning of his tactics. Some tank crews began refusing to advance if Poole's unit was reported nearby. The laughter that once filled German radio waves had turned into static-filled silence. But behind the triumph was the quiet exhaustion that ate at all of them. Every victory blurred into the next. The inside of the tank was black with soot, their uniforms stiff with grime. They'd stopped shaving, stopped counting meals, stopped noticing how thin they'd become. Late one night, as they sat on the hull under a pale moon, Murray asked, "You ever think about all those men in those tanks, boss?" Poole stared at the horizon. "Every night." "You ever feel bad about it?" Poole exhaled smoke, his eyes distant. "I feel bad that they started it." He didn't say more. The silence between them was heavier than any armor. A few days later, while pushing toward the German border, Poole's convoy came under air attack. Stukas, the vultures of the Luftwaffe, screamed down from the clouds. Their sirens wailed, a sound that froze blood. The ground shook as bombs fell. "Move!" Poole shouted. The driver gunned the engine, mud flying in every direction. A bomb hit near the column, flipping a tank like a toy. Poole's crew watched in horror as shrapnel shredded men and metal alike. One fragment punched through their hull, ricocheting off the breech. Lopez went down, bleeding. Poole grabbed him by the shoulder. "Stay with me," he yelled, pressing a bandage against the wound. Lopez's breathing was shallow but steady. They survived again, but barely. The attack left them shaken. That night, Poole sat alone in the turret, eyes fixed on the stars. The wind howled through the shattered trees. He thought of Texas. Wide skies, quiet nights. His wife's voice carried on memory. Somewhere behind him, Europe burned. The war had turned him into something he didn't recognize, half man, half machine. He had learned to feel the rhythm of destruction and call it strategy. Every kill came with less triumph, more emptiness. But there was no turning back. The machine rolled forward, and he rolled with it. By December, Poole's name reached Eisenhower's desk. Some called for medals, others for rest. But Poole refused to stop. "When my men stop fighting," he told his commanding officer, "I'll stop leading." The farmer's legend had become unstoppable. A story soldiers whispered for courage. He was the man who made the impossible look ordinary. And yet, deep inside, he knew this could not last. The tank was coughing oil now, the engine worn thin. His crew was running on fumes. He once joked, "If this thing holds one more week, I'll buy it a saddle." None of them laughed. On their 81st day of combat, The horizon turned red again. Not with dawn, but with fire. German anti-tank guns lay hidden in the woods ahead. Poole's Sherman moved first. The radio crackled. Then came the sound, sharp, final, like God slamming a door. The shell tore through the hull. Flames erupted inside. Poole was thrown clear as the tank exploded behind him. The air filled with burning fuel and the screams of metal. When he hit the ground, everything went black. The legend had reached its breaking point, but even in that instant, before the light faded, he thought he saw the impossible sight. His Sherman still firing, still fighting, even as it burned, because the Germans might destroy the machine, but they could never kill the will that drove it. He woke up to the smell of antiseptic instead of diesel, to silence instead of gunfire. For the first time in 81 days, Lafayette Poole couldn't hear the rumble of a tank engine. His head was bandaged, his leg heavy under layers of plaster, and when he tried to move, pain rippled through him like lightning. The nurse told him he was lucky to be alive. He didn't feel lucky. Outside the field hospital, the war was still roaring toward Germany, and his men were still out there, somewhere in that thunder. He had led them through hell, and now, for the first time, he wasn't leading anyone. He stared at the ceiling for hours, listening to distant trucks and muffled prayers. Every sound felt foreign, too quiet. He reached for his dog tags and rubbed them between his fingers, as if the metal could still connect him to his tank. He could almost hear it breathing. In the mood, the Sherman that had carried him farther and faster than any man should have gone. It was gone now, burned out on a nameless road near the Siegfried line. And so was the legend, or so it seemed. Days later, when the doctors finally told him the truth, he didn't react. His right leg was gone below the knee. There would be no more tank battles, no more engines roaring beneath his hands, no more fields of fire. The Texas farmer had fought his last harvest. For a long time, he didn't speak to anyone. Word spread through the division like wildfire. The men who had followed him wept quietly, some writing his name on the sides of their tanks for luck. Command sent telegrams filled with medals and praise, Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, Legion of Merit. But to Poole, it all sounded like noise. He didn't fight for medals. He fought because every tank he destroyed meant one less gun aimed at his friends. Now, with the war grinding toward its bloody finale, he felt like he'd been left behind while the world moved on without him. When he was finally shipped back to the States, reporters waited on the dock, notebooks in hand, flashbulbs popping like artillery. "Is it true you destroyed 258 enemy tanks, Sergeant?" one asked. "How does it feel to be the top tank ace of the U.S. Army?" another shouted. Poole didn't answer right away. He looked down at the wooden prosthetic strapped to his leg, then back up at the flashing lights. "Feels like I lost one too many," he said quietly. That was all. Back home in Texas, the fields were just as he remembered, wide, quiet, endless. The wind carried the smell of earth and hay, and for a moment, it almost felt like peace. But inside, he carried a noise that never stopped. The clank of treads, the thump of the main gun, the scream of ricochets. He tried to plow his land again, but every furrow reminded him of tank tracks. Every gust of dust looked like smoke. Neighbors came to visit, calling him a hero. Kids gathered around to hear stories about the war. But Poole never bragged. He told them about his crew instead: Murray, Lopez, Delaney. He said they were the real heroes. When one boy asked if he was scared during battle, Poole smiled faintly. "Scared every damn second," he said. "Courage ain't the absence of fear. It's riding straight through it." In 1946, he re-enlisted. Most men would have stayed home, but Poole wasn't built for quiet. He joined the newly formed U.S. Army Tank Training Program, teaching young soldiers how to survive inside the same kind of steel coffin that had carried him through Europe. They called him the one-legged ace. But behind the jokes was reverence. He trained hundreds of tankers who would later fight in Korea and beyond. Even off the battlefield, his lessons echoed: know your crew, know your ground, and never underestimate the man they call a fool. The Germans had once mocked the Shermans as easy-bake ovens. They'd laughed at the farmer from Texas. But history has a long memory. and irony loves to circle back. After the war, captured German officers admitted that Poole's tactics had terrified them. His aggressive maneuvers, his uncanny reading of terrain, these became part of U.S. Army doctrine. The man they once called a cowboy in a tin can had quietly rewritten how America fought armored warfare. By the 1950s, Poole was living a modest life in Texas, walking with a limp but standing tall in every veteran's parade. When people asked if he missed the tank, he'd grin and say, "Every day. But she gave me all she had." His wife said he still woke up at night sometimes, reaching for controls that weren't there, murmuring orders in his sleep. The war had ended, but in his dreams, the engine never stopped running. Years later, historians would call him the greatest American tank ace of World War II. 258 confirmed kills in 81 days, a record untouched to this day. But Poole never called himself a hero. When a journalist asked what he thought about being compared to fighter aces like Richard Bong or Chuck Yeager, Poole laughed. "Those fellas fought the sky," he said. "I fought the mud." And yet, beneath the humor, there was a quiet truth. The war had taken much from him, his leg, his youth, his peace. But it had given him something too. A legacy built not on glory, but on grit. He became proof that greatness could come from ordinary soil, that a farmer could teach the world how to fight machines designed to dominate men. In 1988, Lafayette Poole passed away at 73. They buried him in San Antonio, beneath a simple headstone that read, Sergeant Lafayette G. Poole, U.S. Army, World War II, 1919 to 1988. No long inscription, no grand title, just his name and his country. But among the tankers who still whisper his story, he remains something larger. A legend born of iron, fire, and stubborn will. If you visit his grave today, you might see a strange thing. Small model Shermans left by veterans and historians, some scratched with the name in the mood. Others carry tiny inscriptions. For the farmer. It's their way of saluting a man who never asked for a salute. And in military academies, his tactics are still studied. Officers watch old footage and read field reports describing Poole's pattern. The art of using motion, terrain, and communication to outthink stronger enemies. His lessons shaped generations of soldiers who never met him but still move their tanks with the rhythm he discovered. Time has a way of blurring heroes, of turning men into myths. But when you strip away the medals and headlines, Poole's story isn't about destruction. It's about transformation. A farmhand who turned the simple instincts of plowing soil into the art of surviving war. It's about how mockery became mastery, and how laughter turned into silence on battlefields that no longer exist. One of his last recorded interviews ended with a quiet line that summed up his life better than any historian could. The reporter asked him what he thought about the Germans calling him the farmer. Poole chuckled, adjusting his prosthetic leg. "Guess they were right," he said. "I did a lot of plowing." The irony was perfect. The insult that once made soldiers laugh had become the very word that defined his legend. Somewhere, beyond the reach of time, the sound of treads still rolls across a muddy French field, carrying the ghost of a man who refused to quit. And maybe, if you listen close enough, you can still hear his voice over the static of memory. If one farmer could rewrite a battlefield, what could one mind do today? Because in the end, that's the moral he left behind. That genius doesn't wear medals or come from academies. Sometimes it comes from the dirt, from a man who once fixed tractors under the Texas sun and ended up changing the way nations wage war. The laughter faded. The legend stayed.